I'm going to introduce our distinguished guest, Ambassador Alan Baker. He's an attorney and a graduate of the University of London and the Hebrew University, and he's one of Israel's leading legal experts. He served as legal counsel and deputy director general of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs between 96 and 2004, and followed by 4 years as Israel's ambassador to Canada. And he previously joined the Foreign Service after spending several years as a military prosecutor in the IDF. And he was also, in many of his 35 years of service, he was involved in the peace process, so to speak, peace process, drafting various agreements between Israel and its neighbors, many of which were ripped up, but at least he knows full well what it's like to negotiate with Israel's challenging neighbors. In 2012, he was appointed by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice to serve on the Levy Commission to consider the situation of building in Judea and Samaria, and he came up with the conclusion that Israel has a right to build and be in Judea and Samaria. That's his astute legal position. As a non-lawyer, as a businessman, I'll give you my 15-second assessment of the situation, and that is that Israel has more rights to Judea and Samaria than America has to America. And so when anyone ever says to me, oh, why don't you give back or give away this or that, I say, okay, great. And so I guess we'll also give away New Mexico and Texas. And then I use that expression. They go, oh, gee, that's right. Jews have been there for 38 years, and Americans have been in America for about 400 years. It's not even close as to who has more rights. But if we don't speak up, then we, in effect, lose our rights because we get drowned out by the noise of false narratives. But anyways, I'd like to our guest of honor, Ambassador Alan Baker, to come up.
You want to read the inscription?
Yeah.
You want to read it?
Can you read it? It's a little small.
Okay, fine. I'll read it. Shomer Yisrael Award presented to Ambassador Alan Baker for your tireless efforts in defending our rights to live and prosper throughout the land of our people. One Israel Fund 20th Anniversary Gala Dinner, Tribeca Rooftop, New York, June 9th, 2014.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Kenny, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Now I feel, after taking part in so many negotiations that have been torn up, I feel really useful. First and foremost, let me express my appreciation to the One Israel Fund for bestowing this honor on me. It really came as a complete surprise and shock, and I'm genuinely humbled by this. I've worked for 35, 40 years, basically as an international lawyer, as a negotiator, negotiating with Egyptians, Jordanians, Lebanese, Syrians, Palestinians, Americans, Europeans of all types and colors. And this has been my professional field, and this is the field that I consider myself an expert in, and I see myself as a lawyer, not as a politician. I've never been identified with this or any other political direction or identification. I've always identified myself as an international lawyer, and I've always tried to represent what is the law and what is the correct interpretation of the law. The common elements that unite us here this evening, and indeed serve as the very basis for the functioning of the One Israel Fund, are the towns and villages that have been established in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem in realization of the very basic legal and historic rights of the Jewish people from time immemorial to settle on the land promised to that people. The One Israel Fund, dedicated to supporting the welfare and safety of men, women, and children of Judea and Samaria, as we've seen in the film and as we've heard, is doing vital work on the ground, making a substantive contribution to the lives of the residents of Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem. It's not just talking, this is actual, substantive work that's being done that can be felt. It's felt by us all, and as such, it's all the more important and appreciated. But as I said, I'm in the legal and political field. I work as an international lawyer, as a negotiator. For all these 35, 40 years, I've lived, eaten, slept together in close connection with all the various people that I've negotiated with. And in actual fact, I'm just preparing a book with some very interesting stories on comical stories and tragic stories on various episodes during the course of these negotiations. When you sit in a jacuzzi with Jibril Rajoub, one of the main largest terrorists, the Palestinian terrorists, and you sit negotiating and complaining about your wives and mothers-in-law, this is an interesting story that has to be written. Or when you complete the negotiations and Erev Rosh Hashanah and everybody's in a hurry to fly back to Israel, but we all have to wait because Yasser Arafat's going from one to the other, kissing everyone, and I haven't washed my face since. These are little stories that are very interesting and show a different side to the negotiating process. But to be serious, in my writings and in the statements that I've made, especially since I left government service, I've been trying to point to this amazing element of misrepresentation and misconception that seems to be prevalent in the international community as to the legal and historical aspects of the rights of the Jewish people in our area. My work in the Edmund Levy Commission, and I was appointed to the commission as an international lawyer, was to ensure that those building in the various projects in Judea and Samaria, the building is done legally, it's done in accordance with the requirements of international law, it's done in accordance with the requirements of Israeli law, to ensure that everything is above board and in accordance with the norms, the humanitarian and legal norms of international practice and international law. But despite the fact that we came to a very clear conclusion after having analyzed international law, Jordanian law, Ottoman law, Israeli law, that the rights of Israel, the rights of the Jewish people, are rights that are well-based historically and legally from time immemorial. And anybody who claims that or ignores these rights or denies these rights are either deliberately ignoring something which is blatantly clear, or there's some ulterior political motive behind this position that seems to be prevalent among the international community. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we can't ignore the fact that something's fundamentally wrong in the manner in which the international community, including Israel's best friends, and I'm talking about Israel's best friends here, I'm talking about in Europe, I'm talking about the United Nations as a whole, which is no best friend of Israel. They perceive and they represent Israel's towns and villages in Judea and Samaria and in Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem, not just East Jerusalem, not just West Jerusalem, but the whole of Jerusalem. They represent these as illegitimate, as illegal, in violation of international law. To claim in statements, in resolutions, in lawsuits, that settlers are illegitimate, that Israel's settlements are illegitimate, is simply legally wrong in accordance with international law. It has absolutely no basis. When the Secretary of State of the United States, Israel's best friend, stands up in front of the international media, together with the head of the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, and declares openly that Israel's settlements are illegitimate, he's wrong. He's legally, he's internationally, he's wrong. But by saying so, that makes me, Alan Baker, resident of the Har Adar village settlement, that makes me an international criminal. And by the same token, ladies and gentlemen, that misrepresents all of you sitting here this evening as if you are accessories in this act by supporting the residents of the towns and villages. This has no legal basis whatsoever, and whoever claims this is either totally ignorant or is repeating political statements that are empty and have no basis. Now, it's very difficult for me to believe that serious international leaders representing governments, taking part in negotiations, would make a mistake. These people have advisors, these people are supposed to know what they're talking about. But when Israel is brazenly and falsely accused that its settlement policy is the cause of the breakdown in the negotiations, and this in itself fuels the Palestinian propaganda machine and justifies continued refusal to negotiate, and even serves as a justification for continued violence against the residents of the settlements, something is very wrong. It's fundamentally wrong that due to Palestinian and extreme left-wing propaganda, including various Jewish elements here in the United States, as well as in the Israeli media, that the dreaded S word, settlements, are applied selectively and only to Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, and have received such a negative connotation. The fact that the Turks are settling in northern Cyprus, that the British are moving thousands of people to live in settlements in northern Cyprus, the fact that the Moroccans are settling in Western Sahara, they're not settlements. Nobody considers these to be settlements. And in fact, the Europeans are even encouraging the Moroccans and giving them business and supporting their oil and fishing rights in the area. So there seems to be an amazing double standard that is directed only against what Israel is doing in the territories. This is wrong, legally and historically. In the same way that the term that is commonly used and nobody really thinks about it, occupied Palestinian territory, it appears in tens of General Assembly resolutions in the UN every year. It appears in speeches, in statements, in declarations by leaders, US leaders, European leaders, everybody. But it's wrong. There's no such thing. The territories are not Palestinian, and the territories are not occupied. And this is nothing more than the political viewpoint of those states that voted in the various General Assembly resolutions. There's never been any legal document, any treaty, any convention, any contract, any binding resolution that has determined that the territories are Palestinian. And the Levy Commission proved, on the basis of a very thorough professional and legal analysis of international law and practice, that the territories are not occupied. The territories are unique. In Latin it's called sui generis, based on the lengthy legal and historical rights of the Jewish people from time immemorial. Nobody can claim to have greater, deeper, and more seriously legally based rights, in fact, indigenous rights. The Jewish people are the most indigenous of all peoples in the area, in the world. No other people can claim to be the indigenous people of the area. And if you don't accept what's written in the Bible, then read Persian, Greek, Roman historians who wrote about this strange tribe of people with their heads covered, with strange eating habits that wandered around in that period before the Common Era. And if you don't accept any of this, then, and if you're especially the non-Jewish people among us, if you believe in Jesus, then one can't deny the fact that he was born, lived, and died a Jew. And if so, then what were the Jews doing at that time? Why were they wandering around in the area? Because they had the right to be there. And so nobody can deny this. And anybody who does deny this is basically denying historic and legal, the legal background and the legal rights of the Jewish people. When Catherine Ashton, the head of the foreign affairs of the EU, together with the US State Department, repeatedly expressed the fact that Israel's settlements are illegitimate, they're prejudging a negotiating issue. The issue of the final status is still part of the negotiating process. And Kenny, whether we like it or not, this is something that Israel has agreed to, and this is something that's still on the negotiating table. And so anybody that can come along and declare that Israel's settlements are illegitimate is prejudging an issue which is a negotiating issue. Anybody that can declare that the 1967 Green Line is a border, first of all, is totally ignorant of the fact that there's no such thing, there's no such border, this is an armistice demarcation line. But also, the fact is that the issue of borders is a negotiating issue. So anybody who declares this, and when the United States promises the Palestinians that the Green Line will be the border, then they are prejudging a negotiating issue, despite the fact that they're acting as an honest broker in a negotiation. Now, the straw that's broken the camel's back is, in fact, the latest events over the last month. And this has brought us to a very critical situation which we must all take very, very seriously. Because the fact that the Palestinian, that the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the head of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, the fact that he wrote a letter to the United Nations and to the government of Switzerland asking to become party to international treaties as a state is a fundamental breach of all the various agreements that have been signed between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Up to now, there have been many crises and many breakdowns in negotiations. But this is the first time that there's been a fundamental violation of what is considered to be an international agreement. The agreement says specifically that neither side shall do anything to change the status of the territory pending the outcome of the permanent status negotiations. By signing international conventions as a state, they are changing the status. By joining up with Hamas, they're violating a central provision of the agreement which prohibits any terrorist entity or terrorist infrastructure as part of the Palestinian governance. By entering into international agreements, they're violating a central provision that prohibits them from conducting foreign affairs. These are fundamental breaches, ladies and gentlemen. And as the lawyers among us know, a fundamental breach means that you're frustrating the very capability of carrying out the agreement or the treaty or the contract, and it renders the contract voidable, which means that the other party has the right to consider its own interests, to take its own unilateral measures, or to decide what it wants to do according to its own security, demographic, or other interests. And so we're in a very, very vital juncture at the moment where the Israeli government, the Israeli people, but all of us have to think very carefully now, what do we do in this situation where it's clear that those who we've been negotiating with up to now, they don't need to negotiate with us anymore, because they know that they've got the international community, including the US government, and including the Europeans and the UN, they've got them behind them for whatever they do. This projected unity government has already been given a green light by the international community, by the US administration, by the Europeans. So why should they bother negotiating with us? They're going to get what they want without having to negotiate with us. This means that we now, for the first time since the negotiations began, we're now at a juncture that we really have to make a very, very serious decision. And so, whilst it's not for us sitting here to be able to make this decision, we have a job, we have a very important task, and your presence here this evening and bestowing this honor on me and your constant and loving support and assistance to all of us, to all the residents of Israel's towns and villages, Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. This in itself is a loud and clear response to what is what I consider to be a clearly misguided and willful campaign against Israel, lacking any legal or historical justification. I really hope that this will be heard and noted, duly noted, in the right places. And I think we all have to do whatever we can to make our feelings heard with whoever we can make these feelings heard. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.